Welcome to Counting the Cost on Al Jazeera. I'm Darren Jordan. Each week we'll bring you all the business and economic news from around the world. Coming up on the programme, laid off in Lebanon, we examine Beirut's ailing job market. Net gains, a look at the finances of the footballing world. And circling the week, Malaysia's loan sharks prey on their victims. Well, the spring of 2009 brought with it budding hopes of an economic recovery. But investor expectations have fallen short. The recently released World Bank report has forecast a grim year ahead, causing upheaval in financial markets. Well, for more on that, let's go to the Americas and Shihab Ratansi.
Yes, the World Bank warned the worst is not over and the recession is going to be deeper than it originally thought. In March, the World Bank said the global economy would shrink by 1.7% this year. Now it says it will fall by 2.9%. Hardest hit, likely to be the Eastern European countries and Central Asia. Their economies had been expected to contract by 2%. That figure's now changed to 4.7%. Of the rising economic powers, the so-called BRIC countries, growth numbers for Russia and Brazil have been revised lower, and without strong growth from India and China, developing nations will contract 1.6%. Owen Fay reports.
This report can be seen as the clearest reason yet why any talk of green shoots of recovery in the global economy needs to be treated with skepticism. Because as the World Bank makes clear, while there are suggestions of improvements among the wealthiest nations of the world, they are by no means guaranteed. And equally as important, for many developing economies, the worst may be yet to come. And that's simply a reflection of economic reality. By definition, developing countries have no choice but to rely on their wealthier counterparts in order to improve. And right now, that money just isn't there. The report shows that money going to emerging economies has slumped drastically. 2 years ago, outgoing capital amounted to $1.2 trillion. For 2009, the best estimate is now $363 billion, which means if it gets any worse, $1 trillion will have been wiped off the books. And it could get worse because the World Bank believes those wealthy nations, among them the United States, Japan, and the countries comprising the Eurozone, are not as robust as their leaders might suggest. One of the examples that best illustrates this skepticism is Japan's BSI survey. Essentially, it reveals if business leaders feel positive or negative about the state of the economy. In March, the government was pleased to announce that business confidence stood at minus 13.2. Even if you don't understand economics, that doesn't sound very good, and it's not. But the optimism comes from the fact that at least that number isn't as bleak as the previous quarter, when it came in at minus 66. What that means is while things might not seem as bad as they were, that's not the same as saying they're all of a sudden getting better. The World Bank believes right now they're just less worse. And the reason for that is because even if the recession were declared over tomorrow, soaring inflation would suddenly become the biggest danger. That's what worries critics of the Western stimulus packages. They believe wealthy governments have borrowed too much money. And once too much money is in circulation, and interest rates are as minuscule as they are, you have created the perfect economic conditions for inflation to wreak havoc, and thus destroy a sustained recovery. The United States, Great Britain, and other major economic powers all believe they have that threat under control. But if they don't, it's the emerging economies which may yet pay the heaviest price. Owen Fay, Al Jazeera.
Let's talk a little bit more about this. We're joined by Andrew Burns. He's the lead economist at the World Bank. Is there any hope then, as far as the World Bank is concerned for the moment?
Well, there's certainly lots of hope. I think there's little hope that we're going to have a very strong recovery anytime soon. Our view is currently that the world economy is scratching along at the bottom. We do expect the recovery to begin in the third and fourth quarters of this year and on into 2010, 2011. So there we're expecting growth to pick up to about 1.2% and around 2.5%, almost 3% in 2011. So there is a recovery coming. The issue really is that we've gone down so far already that even with those strong growth rates, things are going to feel and be relatively bleak. We're still going to have high unemployment. We're still going to have deflationary pressures. And of course, in the developing world, we're going to see a lot of pressure on the poor.
Why is it that when developed countries get into economic trouble, the World Bank says, spend your way out of it, stimulate, When the developing countries get into economic trouble, you say contract, don't spend, cut public spending, cut interest, raise interest rates rather, and so on. It does seem like a terribly hypocritical stance, which gives pain to developing nations when they get into trouble, and and sort of gain for developed nations when they get into trouble.
Yeah, I can see how there's that kind of perception going on here. In the current situation, we have a situation where the United States is in trouble, where they do have the means and a relatively healthy balance sheet so that they can stimulate, and so we encourage
a healthy balance sheet without the deficit and so forth.
Well, the deficit going in was relatively 5 or 6%, but in terms of their debt to GDP ratio was relatively low. It's clear that when they come out of this and after they spend the money that they anticipate doing, they're going to have a much less healthy balance sheet, and they're going to be in less capable conditions to respond.
But if this is a third world country or a developing country,
so
you'd be saying, hang on, this is crazy, we're not going to give you the money.
So that's really what I want to get to. When we're looking at the developing countries, countries in Africa or elsewhere, the issue is very much different. I think if they had the resources and if they had the capabilities and if there were people willing to lend them money, then we would definitely be encouraging them to resist this cyclical downturn, and indeed we are. The real crisis for them, and I think your initial story illustrated that well, is that the sources of finance that might allow them to run a deficit just aren't there. We had $1.2 trillion flowing into developing countries in 2007. This year we're expecting only $363 billion. That's a tight constraint.
Andrew Burns, we have to end it there, but thank you very much.
Described by the International Monetary Fund as remarkably resilient, Lebanon seems to be faring better than most in the face of the global financial downturn. This year, the economy is projected to grow by 4%, but the outlook is not as good as it seems. Remittances, which make up a fifth of the economy, are drying up. With hundreds of thousands of Lebanese working in the badly hit Gulf states, transfers home have fallen sharply. But with many of these skilled Lebanese expatriates now looking to go home, the rate of unemployment is set to rise, putting an additional strain on the economy. Todd Baer met with people who are already struggling to make ends meet.
Beirut's seafront corniche and the in-crowd are hanging out. Five-star hotels are full, the restaurants packed, and money is changing hands.
I love Lebanon.
On the surface, this appears to be a thriving economy, but the reality is not so rosy. Ahmed Masri earns just $300 a month. It's barely enough to provide food for his family.
I work day and night, and I don't even get a normal life for my family.
According to government statistics, Ahmed is one of an estimated 1.6 million Lebanese who live below the poverty line. His neighbor, Layla Faki, is another one. She supports herself and 2 children on $100 a week. That's for food, clothing, and everything else.
The situation is very bad, especially for young people who have just graduated from university.
Lebanon's successful parliamentary elections earlier this month provided a boost of confidence for the country's economy.
I vote for the Lebanese elections.
But overall, the figures are not good.
Economists say 30% of people in Lebanon live below the poverty line. The unemployment rate is estimated at about 10%, and the country has a public debt of nearly $50 billion, which is one of the biggest in the world.
I would say Lebanon is in a critical economic situation.
Dr. Kamal Hamdan says the economy must be the top priority for Lebanon's new government.
The new ruling class, after this election, should dare to take very big decisions concerning reform.
The biggest challenge for ordinary Lebanese is coping with inflation as the cost of basic goods and services rise. Ahmed Masri doesn't want to be part of the in-crowd. He just wants a fair chance to provide for himself and his family. Todd Baer, Al Jazeera, Beirut.
Coming up after the break, paying their debts, we visit the victims of Malaysia's loan sharks.